What's up, everybody? Welcome into a new edition of the By the Horns podcast presented by Toyota. And Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. So find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. I'm Cam Smith alongside my man, K.C. Johnson. You know him, CHSN Bulls Insider. And K.C., we decided to go to the social media streets and open up the mailbag for Bulls fans and people curious about this team. And we wanted fans to submit their questions. And we told them that we're going to answer those questions and have a nice full conversation on some of the thoughts that they have for this Bulls team and just curiosity of what they should do with this roster and where they should go. But before we get to the mailbag portion of this show, we have to start it off by paying our respect to the legend Bob Love, who unfortunately passed away yesterday. The Bulls released a statement on the passing of Bob Love, who had a long battle with cancer and passed away at the age of 81. And KC, we both were able to share some things on Bob Love and just who he was as a player, but then also as a man off the court during the Bulls-Pistons game on Monday night. When you think of the name Bob Love, what comes to mind on just his impact on and off the court?
The biggest thing, Cam, and a lot of beautiful words have already been spoken. Jerry and Michael Reinsdorf both released very beautiful statements. I love what Kendall Gill shared with you on the post-game show following the Pistons victory. If you haven't seen that, I advise you to check it out on our website. That clip is fantastic. But what always comes to mind to me is this man, always had a smile on his face, and the obstacles he always faced throughout his life never beat him down. He kept a sunny disposition throughout adversity. It's really kind of a life lesson that we all could draw inspiration from and learn from, because he could have very easily thrown in the towel multiple occasions in his life and his career. I mean, this is a guy who was raised in rural Louisiana, had to leave a somewhat abusive home situation, really had to carve his own path to get to college, and, had a slow start to his NBA career and then fashioned himself into a three-time All-Star. And then off the court, he overcame a severe stuttering problem to become a motivational speaker and give back to this Chicago community that he loves so dearly. So it's really an inspirational tale, an amazing story. And I'm telling you, every time I talked to that guy, he had a smile on his face. And there was no woe is me, no complaining. And that's something that I always drew strength from whenever I ran across Butterbean.
Yeah, Casey, I love hearing that about Butterbean, and just that's his nickname that everybody that knows, especially in Chicago and knowing who Bob Love is. It's just like when you say, "Hey, Butterbean," or "What's up, Butterbean?" He turned and had that big smile on his face. So I vouch for you on that. The times that I saw Bob Love out around in Chicago, he was just a guy that exuded warmth, right? A calmness, a certain peace that you just don't find. And it also reminded you that, you know what, there are great humans out here, right? And that's why I think with Bob Love, we highlight more of what he's been able to do off the court than on the court. And you alluded to just his 3 All-Star appearances. Of course, a guy that led the Bulls franchise in scoring until Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen came along. But it still says a lot about him still to be placed 3rd on the Bulls all-time scoring list. So that's a guy that got a lot of buckets, but it's the off the court aspect and just the people that he impacted and the communities that he impacted, just with a smile, a quick conversation, or an in-depth conversation. And so for him to overcome that speech impediment and really be a motivational speaker, to really provide confidence and remind people that they don't have to run away from their fear or something that they may view as a fault or a fall, they don't have to do that. They should attack it head on, and they can become better with that. And that's a great example from what Bob Love shows so many different people. And we were talking before we recorded the pod, I was thinking about my uncle who posted on Facebook just his interactions with Bob Love throughout the years. And my uncle, I'm not going to call him older, but he's a seasoned guy. So he's been around all the time and remembers when Bob Love played with the Bulls and even would be at the Chicago Stadium with my grandfather and also my mother and my aunt, and them speaking with Bob Love after the game, but then also him attending Bob Love's first basketball camp in Chicago. So we've just seen so many just outpourings of love and appreciation and just honor for Bob and who he was, not only as a Chicago Bulls legend, but also who he was as a man. And so we definitely send our deepest condolences to his family, his wife, his close friends, and all of his friends and everybody that's been connected to Bob Love, because he for sure was an icon, not only with the Chicago Bulls, but definitely in the city of Chicago. So rest in power, 10.
Yeah, that's really well said. Sorry to cut you off there, Cam.
No,
the last thing I just want to quickly add was I'm just so thankful that my last memory or my last interaction with Bob was at the inaugural Ring of Honor ceremony last year. And,
Yeah.
it was not guaranteed he was going to be able to get there because he was obviously going through his health struggles, and he made it there, and he was resplendent in his suit with his wife, Emily, by his side. And he called it the most wonderful day of his life. He just had this big smile on his face. I mean, he went through the receiving line, and you could just see the joy that he was having. So that's something I'm going to carry with me as I move forward, is just that last awesome memory and interaction with the man that you, as you said, he lifted up so many people. So awesome stuff.
Yeah, it really was, man. And we can be more like Bob Love every single day, then we can make things a lot better in this world and in our own lives. All right, KC, let's move it forward, man, and go to the mailbag portion of this podcast, because shout out to our fans, our viewers, everybody that follows us on social media. We got some good questions out there from everyone. So we're going to dive right into it. And the number one question that we've been getting from a lot of just fans and viewers revolves around Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic and their trade value. So let's start off here and go with Suzuki, who threw out the question, where would the Bulls trade Zach and Vooch to, and what's a realistic return for each one of those guys? And obviously with Zach and Vooch, they've been shooting lights out all season. But if you want to go back to their most recent game against the Detroit Pistons Monday night, my goodness, KC, they were flame throwing from three and just all over the court.
Yeah, I mean, what this funny is about this question, Cam, is it strikes to the very core of this entire Bulls season, is because, like, on the one hand, you're obviously, if you're a Bulls fan, you're cheering for this team to do well, and you like seeing what you saw last night where both guys are playing at such a high level. But on the other hand, as we all know, they've got to finish bottom 10 to keep that first-round draft pick in what is a soft kind of retool or rebuild or whatever you want to call what the front office is doing. So, Zach and Vooch are very aware of this reality. They've been obviously included in rumors throughout much of their career. I would just caution that, first of all, it's early, and I've not heard any buzz about either candidate in terms of concrete stuff. But I would just caution that, like, the return, is not going to be that high if the trade is even materialized, just because Vooch is older and Zach's contract is so prohibitive in this land of CBA. So it's going to take a team near the deadline that thinks it's one player away from making a deep run. They can get ownership to sign off on perhaps entering, second apron territory. And, they're going to be offloading stuff that, both those guys make big contracts. So obviously the Bulls are going to be trying to recoup draft capital. And you look at let's mention a specific team. You look at like a team like the Lakers, who obviously need some front court help because they've had injuries, and then obviously have always been rumored to be in the LaVine market because of the Clutch Sports connection. They don't have a draft pick, and their matching salaries are players like D'Angelo Russell, Rui Hachimura. So I don't really see a pathway to a trade with the Lakers as of this taping right now. But I would just caution that whatever return would come from either of those players, I think would be a little bit more underwhelming than Bulls fans might like.
Yeah. And I know a lot of Bull fans want to say, hey, strike while the iron is hot with both of these guys playing great basketball, which they are, right? Especially when you go back to what Zach did in the fourth quarter against the Detroit Pistons and knocked down 6 of his 7 threes, and it felt like he was playing 105. And then Nikola Vucevic just from start to finish. And really that's what he's been throughout the season for this Bulls team when he's gotten his opportunities and stay within the flow of the offense. When they found him, is that he's been a guy that's been reliable from the perimeter, but then also down the block. So the value is there in terms of those two guys and what they can bring to another franchise, but it's going to be a situation where you might have to see this thing through, right, to the trade deadline, to your point, KC. So a team like the Lakers, it's interesting to see what they can try and pull off. I'm not too sure on that because, to your point, they don't have the draft capital. I'm thinking of a team like possibly the Phoenix Suns, but I don't think their draft capital will be there enough for the Bulls to make a deal with them. And then also with their books and just how they're tied up with the 3 players of Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker. So it's interesting from that standpoint. But we'll keep our eyes.
Yeah, another team I would throw out there, and this is completely speculative. Again, I'm not creating rumors here. I'm just speculating that for need. I mean, if Kawhi Leonard remains out for the Clippers and they keep underwhelming, I mean, do they, take the plunge and try to add a scorer? You could maybe say that's a little bit of a clunky fit there, but LaVine is a natural scorer. And I mean, they obviously enter the season with high aspirations. They've got off to a tough start. Kawhi Leonard's health is always a concern. They've lost Paul George in free agency. So that's a team that, as you move closer to the trade deadline, I think you might want to keep an eye on seeing where they're going. But, the issue with both players, as you know, Cam, is like they have money beyond this year. Neither of them are expiring. So Vooch has got another season after this, and Zach has 2 more, assuming he picks up his player option, which I'm sure he will. So it's something to monitor. We'll be on it, but it's early in terms of Rumorville for both those players.
All right, let's kind of stay with the Vooch element of the possibility of being traded when it comes to the trade deadline too, because Senpai asked this question, KC. If the Bulls trade Vooch at the deadline, do you think who do you think will be the starting center for this Bulls team? Will it be Jalen Smith, or do the Bulls get a center in the draft, or do you keep the pick, or do you try and get players like Walker Kessler or Nick Claxton? I think that Senpai is just trying to throw some options out there for the Bulls and what they could get.
Well, I don't see Walker Kessler being moved. That would caught me off guard a little bit.
It did as well for me. I'm reading like, wait, Kessler. Okay, Walker Kessler. That's interesting.
Yeah. They could have had him in that draft, but they didn't pick him. So, I mean, I don't know. Jalen Smith to me looks like a backup. I mean, I think he's a pretty serviceable backup, but I don't think he's a starting center. If he's moved to the deadline, I see Billy using a lot of small ball lineups, because the season's, not really about, at this point, it's not totally about trying to win every game you can play. It's about keeping that top 10 pick as much as anything. So I see him experimenting more. But in terms of long-term solutions, if you trade Vooch, you're gonna have to get a center, because I think Jalen Smith is a backup.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, KC, and just comfortable in that role as well. I don't think you don't want to move Jalen Smith out of that comfort zone, because what he has been in the NBA is a backup center and very serviceable in that role as well. So I'm not sure, and I haven't had that conversation with Jalen Smith or what his aspirations are in terms of wanting to be a starting center, but I think of him as a competitor, and maybe if given the opportunity, he would want to step into that spot. But looking at the makeup of this team, he's best served off of the bench for this Bulls team. He's been playing great in that role as well, especially how he's been able to stretch the defense with those second units. All right, Casey, let's move it forward and look at another starter for this Bulls team in Josh Giddey, because the Educator 23 wants to know, what do you think Giddey needs to do to earn an extension, Casey? Is he capable of earning an extension?
I think what he needs to do is lower his price tag. I mean, okay, I never got in a specific. I did some digging on obviously. Let's frame it this way: they didn't reach terms on a contract extension. Giddey is headed to restricted free agency next summer. I did a little bit of digging back then. I didn't get specific numbers, but all I was told is that the gulf was pretty significant in terms of negotiations, so they didn't even get close. I would just say this is historically how the Bulls typically operate with their imminent restricted free agents. Is they don't usually reach agreement on a contract rookie scale extension. Kobe White did not. Patrick Williams did not. Both those guys signed after the season, right before they went into restricted free agency. So this is pretty par for the course for the Bulls. But Giddey, he saw what guys around him from his draft class, and he was the highest pick to not reach terms on extension. He was the 6th overall pick, 1 through 5 all signed, including Jalen Suggs, who got $30 million a year. Whew. I guarantee you that that's what he's looking for. And again, people have to get off of the number and look at percentage of cap, because the cap's going up significantly. That said, $30 million is a pretty high number for a player that, as of right now, is not in your closing lineups. I think the Bulls have the upper hand here because they will let the market dictate his price tag and then decide if they want to match it or not. I don't see Giddey, unless he obviously plays significantly more and better throughout the rest of the season. I don't see him getting $30 million a year, but I've been wrong before, so we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the biggest thing with Giddey, obviously with him not being in the closing lineup, is defensively, right? And that's why Billy Donovan is electing to go with Ayo Dosunmu, a better defender on the ball and really off the ball for this Bulls team, instead of Giddey. So it's one thing, and Casey, you know this as a hooper, you can work on your ball handling, your jump shot, your catch and shoots, all those different situations. Defense is a very specific thing that you can work on, but sometimes it naturally just has to be in you. And I'm not saying that Josh Giddey doesn't have it in him, because he's had situations where he's been attacked, especially when you think about Monday night against Cade Cunningham. He had a couple of possessions on the defensive end where he was able to hold his own one-on-one against Cade Cunningham. But still, that's a small sample size. It's the constant attacks that he deals with and that we've seen from opposing players, and where they just target him in a lot of situations where they just go either high pick and roll or just attack him off the wing. So that's the area for me where I'm like, you can't necessarily go into a gym and say, hey, I want you to drive right, drive left, go behind the back, and then that's how I'm going to be able to work my defense. Like, you have to learn through the fire on that. But right now at this stage with Giddey, he doesn't have that part of his game. And it's one of the reasons why OKC decided to move away from him in that trade with Alex Caruso to bring in a better defender there. But he's one of those guys, as you said, that has to lower that price tag. And again, if I was in his shoes and I'm seeing Jalen Suggs get $30 million a year and I'm seeing Jalen Johnson get 175, I'm like, maybe I should try and see what the market can get for me and get for myself in this situation. But it's very difficult. And you're dealing with a franchise that, as you mentioned, you have the examples of Kobe White and Patrick Williams, where they wait until after that year to sign that rookie extension.
Yeah, and the thing about Giddey that's interesting is, like, the initial reaction when they made the trade was, okay, the Bulls aren't trading Alex Caruso to let Josh Giddey walk. But I would just caution to say that, like, the Bulls are going to have multiple decisions at the end of the season, because Ayo and Kobe will be entering the last year of their deal next season. So, maybe they see enough of Giddey where they're like, they were going to pay Caruso anyway, so do we have to pay Giddey if we think we can extend Kobe and Ayo? Maybe they can flip Giddey for something else. Again, this is way speculative and down the line. I'm just saying, I think the Bulls are really going to use this season as an evaluation season and then make some hard decisions, and they hold the upper hand because of the restricted part of his free agency. I mean, he can't just go out and walk for nothing. So the Bulls will have the ability to make a decision if he even gets an offer sheet from somewhere else. So we'll see how it plays out. But I would put the power of the Bulls side for now.
All right, Casey, let's move to the next one from LaVine Muse 08. Has a question here. Who has been the most surprising, successful young addition on the team? I personally go Julian Phillips because of his very solid 3-and-D nature, but I'd love to hear what you guys and who you guys would choose. So,
all right, you're going first on this one, Cam. I'm going
okay,
first.
All right, you're gonna put me. Okay, all right, cool. I'll go first on this one. So, I'm with LaVine Muse 08 in this one in terms of Julian Phillips and what we've been able to see from him. I mean, he really opened up some eyes in the preseason, and I get it. It's preseason. It's not the regular season, but he's had situations where he's shown some grit and some fight in terms of not just knocking down threes, but just being inside of the paint. I think I know for sure on Monday night against the Detroit Pistons, that dunk against Isaiah Stewart, where he just rolls above him and just paused in the air for a split second to get that bucket to go, was impressive. So he's a guy that's been eager and really willing to do different things for Billy Donovan and this Bulls group off of the bench instead of just being a spot-up shooter and knockdown shooter. We've heard Billy talk about this time and time again with defensively with this Bulls team, especially with that rotation off of the bench, that they're going to need a guy to step up and do some things on the defensive end, because this is still the same Bulls team that is in the bottom half, and not even bottom half, but within the bottom 5 or 6 teams when it comes to charges taken. I believe they still only have 2 on the season, KC, if I'm still correct on that. So Julian Phillips, as we've seen, can be a scrappy guy, and that's just the nature that he comes from, playing at Tennessee with Rick Barnes and that SEC nature. So he has that in him. So for me, I'm with LaVine Muse 08 that he has been a guy for me that in this rotation in terms of additions has been one of the more successful guys.
All right, so in the spirit of good podcasting, I got to pick a different player. So I'm going to go with.
You should have went first, KC. You should have went first.
No, that's why I seated my teammate here. I've made my feelings clear about Julian Phillips on this podcast before. I mean, I think he's a very instinctual player. I'm impressed by him. I will say his impact hasn't really jumped out to me as much the last probably 3 to 4 games, although I did like what he did in Detroit in limited minutes. But I'm going to go with Dalen Terry, and I will preface this by saying this is probably more of a personal pick because my expectations for Dalen Terry were very low to start this season.
Yeah.
I have not. I've found it difficult to find one thing that Dalen Terry does at an NBA starter level to this point. However, I was talking to an assistant coach for another team that I've known for a long time and I trust, and the Bullets were his scout, and he told me like he brought up Dalen to me, like he's like,
wow,
Dalen really stood out on tape. I'm like, yeah, really? He's like, tell me more. He's like, that dude competes. He plays hard every single minute he's out there. And you saw it last night again with that little scrap he got into in Detroit. And I'm talking to Dalen about this. Like, he knows his offense starts with his defense and his activity at that end. And he told me he wants to be one of those pests that, like, people don't even want to go up against, that he just picks them up full court and you're like, get away from me, that kind of stuff. So I will say his defensive activity and energy, and look, playing hard in the NBA is a skill. It is a skill.
Yeah.
So his energy and activity at the defensive end, and I think his passing have really impressed me so far this season. Obviously, he's still got a long way to go to get a consistent shot. Teams don't even honor him at the three-point line. He has, I don't have his percentage in front of me. I should. He has knocked down probably more than I thought, but I would overall just say this is probably, again, a me problem. But I'm going to go with Dalen Terry because it's not only me, but he's impressed people that are scouting the Bulls for their advanced scout work.
Yeah, for sure. And you talk about that, just that aspect of it, and them bringing up the name of Dalen Terry to you and how they were impressed with him on film. That says a lot just about his activity. So I think with Dalen and also Julian, that they feed off of each other, along with Ayo Dosunmu coming off that bench for that group, because they understand that it has to be an instant impact. They have to do something, and it starts on the defensive end, really, when you think about Dalen and also Ayo, but offensively for Ayo and also Julian. So that's a great thing to have, especially with this youth movement that this Bulls team is moving forward with. But when you have a guy like Ayo that is one of the leaders on the team, and we've talked about this on the pod before, of him and Kobe stepping into that leadership role and guys really responding to that. And I think Ayo has, in some ways, kind of taken Dalen and Julian and other guys off of that bench that are a little bit younger under his wing, like Modest as well, and saying, hey, these are the things that you have to do. Well, not maybe sometimes verbally telling them, but physically showing them on the court of what they should be able to do. And that's how you get minutes. That's how you stay in the rotation, and you carve a lane for yourself in the NBA. And so we got to go back to Josh Giddey because I jumped over a question that we got from Nick from GE, and it involves Ayo and Josh Giddey, KC, when it comes to Ayo needing to start over Giddey. Nick from GE believes that Ayo's arguably better on both ends of the floor. If this isn't a tank, and it appears not to be for now, then the best players need more minutes. Giddey already can't play in crunch time. And we talked about Giddey in terms of him being on the bench in those crunch time, clutch minutes.
I understand the question. And look, I came to a game recently. All these games are starting to run together, but what was the last home game? Oh, Cleveland, Friday.
Well, Houston.
Oh, Sunday, yeah.
So,
was that the game? Yeah, that was the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I came to that game on Sunday with my antenna up, and I was digging around, wondering if there was going to be a starting lineup change that night. You know, my veteran beat writer instincts were peaked, and I was like, I got there early. I was digging around. I was talking to people, and I was told no. But I would not have been surprised if that had happened that night. All that said, I don't fully disagree with what the Bulls are doing here, because here's why. If you notice, two things. Nick already alluded to the biggest one, the elephant in the room, is that Ayo's closing games over Giddey. So that's more important, number one. Number two, if you notice, Giddey is being the starter that's getting staggered. So he's coming out usually 4 or 5 minutes after tip, and Ayo is in right away. And then Giddey's taking his second rotational turn with some second unit guys. So he's kind of like the nominal starter right now. I don't want to say the Keith Bogan's role because he's playing a bigger role than that. But he's like the nominal starter now. And then number three, I do think it'd be pretty early and pretty drastic in the season to kind of play that card, given that he was your high-profile trade acquisition.
Yep.
He clearly was down a little bit down on his confidence in OKC, and you're trying to prop up that confidence here in Chicago. And you can say that's soft and it's professional sports. I disagree, man. I think when he's a guy that you need to be a big part of your future, I think using that card this early in the season would be a tough one to recover from. That's just my opinion. What's yours, Cam?
Yeah, I'm with you on that, KC. It's too early on in the season to pull that card, because now you're really just, I'm not going to say kill the confidence of Josh Giddey, but you have him thinking, okay, you guys traded for me and now you're putting me on the bench. I could have stayed in OKC for this. And obviously he didn't have any power over that because the Thunder ultimately held the cards. But for him, it's a whole mental thing. And we know this when it comes to professional athletes. Like when you get into that headspace and you start to mess with them mentally, it changes things for themselves. I'm not saying that it could do that for Josh Giddey, but it's going to be a situation where he has to learn a different role coming off the bench with a unit that is going to be in need of another guy that can replace what Io brings, and that's a defensive guy off the bench and a guard that can make plays on the offensive end. And Giddey offensively, I think, in terms of being a guy that when you kick to the corner or the wing, and I know his percentages have been better than what we've seen in his career from behind the arc, but when you look at Io and who he is and just the instant impact he provides and how he's able to mesh well, no matter if he's off the bench or a starter, as we've seen when Zach was dealing with his right abductor injury and he missed a few games, that Io can get right to it. So I think you want to make sure that you have some kind of, you continue the chemistry, right, and keep it uniform with Giddey there. And Billy and his staff have done a good job of making sure that, okay, we're going to start Josh, bring him out in the 4-minute mark, and then have Io come in to give us that boost. But you're also looking at a guy that when you have him in those situations of we can't hide you defensively, we have to make a choice and we have to bring a better defender in and player in, and that's Io on that end of the floor.
Yeah, another thing I would say is like Giddey is very hard on himself. We've seen it in some of his you saw it in that post-game interview in Cleveland that we posted to our website. I mean, he was like really down with the way he played. He's very self-critical. He does not point the blame outward. He points it inward. He's always soul-searching. And I was actually talking to him a little about this last night, casually in the pregame locker room in Detroit. And I was like, have you always been like that? He's like, always. Every team I've been on, I've always just been very hard on myself. I'm my biggest critic. And, this is a young player. So he already knows, like, he's on the closing lineup. So then to take him out of the starting lineup too, I think that'd be kind of a death knell this early in the season. Yeah. So Nick, hit us up in about 2 months when we do another mailbag.
There we go, Nick from GE. We appreciate the questioning, man, and you tapping in with us, man. But again, with Gideon, you talk about him being hard on himself. I mean, when you have players that are like that, they get right to work. And so I know that he wants to provide an impact when he has his minutes on the court for this Bulls team and saying, okay, well, I know that I'm not going to be in these closing time situations. So when I'm out there, I have to make as much of an impact as I can. And for sure, definitely on the defensive end. All right, let's move it to the sidelines, KC, because we have MJA Hoop, and he has a question that involves Billy Donovan. There seems to be a lot of discourse that Billy is the problem for this team, which I disagree with. What's your view on this? Is a fresh voice needed? Will it make a difference? That's where MJA Hoop is when it comes to Billy Donovan. Do you think that the Bulls are in need of a fresh voice? But I feel that it's still so early on in this season to say, okay, well, let's move on from Billy Donovan and bring a new guy in. I don't think Billy Donovan is the problem with this team. What are your thoughts?
No, you and I are and the questioner are feeling the same way. So, let's first deal with the reality of the situation. Billy Donovan's not going anywhere. I mean, I've always said this, first of all, management loves him. Second of all, ownership loves him. So he's in a pretty good spot if both management and ownership love him. And I always say, is Billy, the elite of the elite? Is he a top 5 NBA head coach? No, probably not. But he's definitely in that tier right below. I mean, this guy was going to be going into the Naismith Hall of Fame at some point, largely obviously his full body of work in his college career. But I mean, he is a basketball mind. And the big thing about Billy that I always say is people say he doesn't make adjustments or whatever. I always push back on that. First of all, he's revamped the offense because we're not DeMar centric anymore. And then let's get into the minutia, the other night in Cleveland, the other night against Houston when nothing was working defensively, he was mixing up everything. He tried some zone for a little bit. He went from switching to not switching. He went through Javon Carter and Torrey Craig out there in the third quarter trying to get something. The guy makes adjustments all the time. And the biggest quality that the nitpick on Billy that I think is legitimate is I think he treats veterans a little bit differently than young players in terms of he may not always, be as hard on veterans as young players. But I think there are a lot of coaches you could probably say that about. But the thing I would say about Billy that is his biggest strength, the dude is the same person every day. I have never seen this guy in a bad mood. I have never seen him not consistently positive and optimistic. He's very direct with his communication. When you deal with consistency as an NBA player, that is such a big thing to get from your coaching staff. So, and I've witnessed it now for however many years, 5 years. So that is, to me, is one of his biggest strengths as an NBA head coach.
Yeah, I'm with you, KC. I think that as a player, no matter what level you're on, but especially like when you think of the collegiate level, and of course we're talking about the Bulls in the professional level, you want to have a head coach that is going to be the same guy, right? I mean, whether if you like it or you don't like it, but what we've seen from Billy is a guy that is going to be the same in terms of his demeanor. He's not going to duck or hide from anything. And to your point, he's a guy that can make adjustments for this Bulls team. And he has a track record of that, and just his full body of work, as you mentioned, with a guy that's going to be a Naismith Hall of Famer. But I always go back to his days with the Oklahoma City Thunder and how he was able to get the best out of those teams and turn them into a playoff team. And that was impressive to me. So from the time that the Bulls brought him in as head coach to where he is now, and how he's been able to change attacks with this group, given his personnel, especially for this year, where a lot of people didn't expect a lot from this Bulls team. And they've impressed to a certain extent on certain things, but especially how they attack. And that's been impressive to be able to get Nikola Vucevic back to the guy that we've seen that's been effective with his shot, and having him within the flow of the offense, having Zach LaVine understand that, yes, Kobe has emerged and has become one of the leaders on this team along with Ayo, but still you guys have to be able to work in tandem. And we saw a great example of that Monday night in Detroit, where it was Vooch really carrying things offensively for that Bulls group. And then you had Kobe as well. And Zach found his time in the fourth quarter where he just exploded. So I think that all goes back to coaching and how he's having these conversations with his veteran guys and also his younger guys to get them ready to play. And the biggest example was coming off that Houston loss, which was embarrassing at the United Center on Sunday, and Billy trying to mix some things up defensively. But KC, there had to be a conversation with Billy and the team as a whole saying, hey, guys, we just have to be better as a team, one-on-one defensively, as a team defensively. Yeah. And you saw shades of that against the Detroit Pistons, where they stopped that skid of giving up over 140 points, which they did in their back-to-back losses against the Rockets and the Cavs, and held a Detroit Pistons team that's young, that's very talented, to only 112 points. And I think that's because of the coaching and the film work that Billy and his coaching staff has been able to do to get their team prepared. And there was an urgency out there from the players. And we know that they're motivated, that we've heard from the players that even specifically Kobe White saying it was a disservice to the organization and Bulls fans in the city of Chicago, just how they played against the Rockets. So they have some pride, and we saw that part as well. But it's also to Billy and his coaching staff of getting the players and reminding the players like, hey, we got to go out there and we have to play and do a better job from what we saw in our previous game. So I don't think Billy moving away from him, and I'm not going to say I know that moving away from Billy is not the move that the Bulls should make, because he is a hell of a coach, especially for this roster.
Two other quick things. I'm glad you brought up OKC, because the other thing is, like, if you look at those teams were really different in his 5 years there. I mean, you had Durant for 1 year, and then by the end, you're playing a 3-guard lineup. I mean, he just adjusts to his personnel, and that leads into my second point. Like, as soon as the DeMar sign trade happened, Vooch told me Billy called him and was like, here's what I'm thinking about offensively. Here's how I envision you in this. And if you see Vooch, I mean, he's obviously working in more space. And this is not a knock on DeMar. It's just DeMar operates in a place that restricts your space because he likes to operate in the mid-range. I mean, he's going to be a Hall of Famer too. So it's not a knock on DeMar. It's just, okay, DeMar's gone. Here's how we're going to maximize you now, Vooch, without DeMar. And like the communication, Vooch told me, was like immediate. And I'm not saying that's exactly why Vooch is off the start he is. I mean, Vooch deserves a lot of credit for that. Yeah. But it's also part of coaching. So we're on the same page here.
And then another example to that is Ayo Dosunmu. And to your point of, Vooch putting in the work is the same thing with Ayo, but still you need to have someone putting them in positions to be successful. And that's what Ayo has been able to do. And, it's Billy having him in those roles, especially when it comes to crunch time and closing time, understanding that Ayo is our best on the ball defender, and a good coach, I'm sure, wouldn't make that adjustment or make that move. So again, it's just one of the examples that Billy has been able to show with his time as Bulls head coach, with the different rosters that he's had, to be able to have this team, one, be competitive, but then also two, really try to have themselves in a position where they're trying to compete for a spot in the playoffs. And we've seen them, especially the past couple of years, being in the play-in. So anybody out there that's trying to add to this discourse or this narrative that Billy Donovan is a problem, just stop it right now. We're not doing that on the By the Horns podcast at all. But KC, we got a late submission from MJ Hoop again, and we had to open up the doors before we close them for MJ Hoop because he had the question in terms of a blast from the past name. And Kirk Hinrich, MJA Hoop, asked, what's the great Captain Kirk Hinrich up to nowadays, KC? And I believe that you still keep in contact with Kirk.
Yeah, Kirk and I have a pretty funny relationship. First of all, Kirk is one of my all-time favorite Bulls I've covered. But he's a great guy, but he just does not like doing media or talking about himself. So he and I have a running joke. Like, think about this: the dude retired. This leads to the question: have you ever heard a peep about this guy? He disappeared. I mean, he's one of the most prominent Bulls in franchise history, and he never did an exit interview. So I always joke with him, when are we going to do our exit interview? We got to get you on the podcast. And he's like, yeah, right, man. But Kirk comes to 1 or 2 games a year, often in a team ambassador role. But for the large part, Kirk is loving his anonymity. He's a total family guy. He's got he's very private, so I won't talk about his family too much, but let's just say he's very content raising his children. One of whom is a very competitive swimmer. So Kirk is living his best life and very happy to be away from the public eye. So
I love to hear that, man. One of the greatest Bulls point guards of all time, Kirk Hinrich. Just a dude that, one, was tough as hell. If you need examples of that, then think about that Bulls Celtics playoff rivalry and that history there with him and Rajon Rondo going back and forth, and Kirk chasing after Rondo. I love that. It was just so Chicago from Kirk being able to do that, but then also just how he impacted the game on both ends of the floor. So for sure, I'm a forever fan of Kirk Hinrich, and I'm sure there's a lot of people in Chicago that'll like that as well with Captain Kirk. So we love MJA Hoop throwing that out because we got that little inside information from KC Johnson and his relationship with Kirk Hinrich. I love that.
Yeah, Kirk is great, man. And let me text him right now. Say we need to get on the pod. I'll be like,
yeah, you know what? Let him know the doors are always open for Captain Kirk on the By the Horns podcast. But look, we appreciate all of our fans, our viewers, our listeners for reaching into the mailbag and throwing out your questions. We appreciate that so much. So for KC Johnson, I'm Cam Smith. This is the wrap for the By the Horns podcast for this edition. And know that the By the Horns podcast is presented by Toyota. Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. So find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. We'll see everybody soon. Thanks for tapping in with us.